I will say some of the links that I used and some of the research that I used was from multiple sources, and not all of the multiple sources are 100% reliable. So we'll have to do some before she puts it all into the county tree. We're going to do some deeper research into more reliable sources. But as we knew that there was a lot of family relations among the chiefs of the Choctaw Nation. What I didn't know when I started looking all this up was how a completely lost tribe that was not a Choctaw tribe played a huge role in the leadership of the Choctaw Nation, and just how deeply embedded the European settlers that came to Mississippi became part of the leadership of the Choctaws. Okay, so we're going to start out with one of my favorites, the DeSoto expedition, particularly the years 1539 to 1542. The expedition did last a year longer, but by that time DeSoto was dead, so I just included the years that DeSoto was still alive. They started, of course, down in Florida, worked their way up through Georgia, the Carolinas, into Tennessee, and back into Georgia and into Mississippi and Alabama, and eventually they made it to Arkansas, Texas, all over the southeast. They brought hogs with them, so that's why we have wild hogs today, but that's a whole nother story. Yeah, you can thank DeSoto for the wild hogs, because that was his doing. But this is the main part of it I wanted to get to. He gave names to the tribes as he encountered them and the villages. And what we understand today of the tribes and the tribal structure is very much related to what DeSoto discovered at that time. When he traveled through the Muskogee Creek, they had basically all independent towns that we know now there were 50 creek towns that would eventually move to meet together every so often to have their intertribal meeting. But the Choctaws, as we know, were split into 3 different chiefdoms, and the one group that he really put a lot of emphasis on as he traveled was the Chickasaw, which became the Chickasaw. And that was right here along the Mississippi-Alabama border right here. He did meet with the Choctaws. He fought off groups of the Choctaws. But a lot of the information we have about the early lives of the southeastern tribes is based on things that DeSoto's expedition wrote down in their journals, which eventually made it to Texas a year and a half after DeSoto died. Now, here's where I bet I'm gonna have to use my other thing here. Okay, so this is pretty much the layout of where the tribal people lived at the time that DeSoto came through, and in the 100 years or so afterward. The Choctaws, you can see, were in the eastern middle part of Mississippi. Now, one thing about how these developed, many of the tribes were basically like towns like the Creeks did. And you'd have like Durant and Idabel and Broken Bow, and the towns were self-governing. But the Choctaws tried to get more focused into their 3 groups, which we know about. But there were other groups around: the Biloxi people, the Pascagoula people, the Tejon people, the Pensacola people, the Alabama people, the Yazoo, the Tunica, the Halma, the Quapaw, and the Chickasaw. But the group I really want to point out is that group that's in between the Chickasaw and the Choctaw. Excuse me, the Chocchiuma people. I have never heard of them before, but they are incredibly prominent in Choctaw history. Now I'm going to go back to the slideshow. And there was fighting between the groups. The Chickasaw allied themselves with the English colonies that were to the east in the Carolinas. The Choctaws would ally themselves with the French settlers near New Orleans. The French governor Jean-Baptiste de Moines, Sir de Bienville, got mad at the Chickasaw because they were supporting the English, and so he led 2 attacks to go after the Chickasaw in the 1730s. He took the Choctaws with him, and when the attacks failed, he blamed the Choctaws for the attacks failing. But the Choctaws, as they were traveling with Bienville, saw that the Chickasaw were up on a high bluff with all of the advantages of geography and topography, and they could see immediately that it was useless to participate in this battle. He also tried to bring in French fighters and French affiliated tribes from the Illinois region, and the timing was off, and the Chickasaw defeated both groups. Now the Choctaw people, the people we saw in between the Chickasaw and the Choctaw, moved west to get away from all this. The English persuaded the Quapaw people, who were on the Arkansas-Tennessee border, to go attack the Choctaw. When the Choctaw were attacked by the Quapaw, they came back to Mississippi, and because the Chickasaws were helping the English also, they started fighting the Chickasaws, and because of the ancient ties between the Choctaws and the Chickasaws, they fought the Choctaws too. And the Choctaws and Chickasaws ganged up on them and whooped them. At one point, there were probably less than 80 Choctaw families remaining in the entire Choctaw tribe, and they would be absorbed into the Choctaw and Chickasaw tribes, except for a few that went to the southeast and joined up with the Houma people in what's now Louisiana. Shumaka. Never had heard of this woman, but she is pivotal. She was the daughter of a Choctaw leader. She got adopted in the Cushapokla clan of the Choctaws and members of Pushmataha's family. And Pushmataha was the chief of the 6 towns branch of the Choctaw Nation. So she gets adopted into the family, and that's where things are going to get really interesting. Europeans start coming into the area and marrying into the Choctaw Nation. Shumaka married an English trader by the name of James Cole. And a lot of these records are very hard to track down, but we have found evidence that they had at least 4 children together. And at least 14 Choctaw chiefs will be descendants of this couple. So we're talking an English trader and a woman that wasn't even Choctaw are going to lead to many of these chiefs. Another English trader, an Irish trader, and 2 French traders will also marry into the family. Okay, so here we go. Let's start with Robert Cole and Coleman Cole. Robert Cole was the son of Shumaka and James Cole. He married a full-blood Choctaw woman named Sally. He would later serve as a chief around the time of removal, 1825 to 1830. His son, Coleman, who you see there on the right, stayed in Mississippi after the removal to care for his grandmother, Shumaka. And after she passed, he came onto Indian Territory and joined the rest of the Choctaw. He claimed that she was 120 at the time of her death. We kind of doubt that that is true. Some of our other evidence shows that she lived a much shorter life, but the story that he told said his grandmother was 120. He came to Indian Territory and would, 50 years after his father, serve as tribal chief from 1874 to 1878. As chief, the first thing he did, he put in a law that required a $100 license fee if a non-Choctaw married a Choctaw woman, which seems kind of ironic because what had his father done? Or his grandfather rather. His grandfather was a white trader who married a Choctaw woman, and he was very much made a law against the practice. The $100 then would be almost $3,000 in today's money. So you could marry a Choctaw woman if you were not of the nation, but you had to pay the price. Okay, Rebecca Cole Cravat was Shumaka and James's daughter. She married a French trader named Jean Cravat. They had 2 daughters. Their daughters were named Nancy and Rebecca, born in 1770 and 1771. Both daughters would marry another French trader named Louis Lafleur. And yes, they both married him at the same time. We have a few cases where, somebody will marry one sister and then that sister dies, they marry a younger sister. But back then, there were multiple cases of people marrying 2 women at once. And that's what Louis Lafleur did. He married both of the Cravat girls, and his brother, Michael, also married a Choctaw woman named Ashuka. 3 future Choctaw chiefs, Greenwood Lafleur, Thomas Lafleur, and Basil Lafleur, will all come from this particular line. These are the Lafleur chiefs. Greenwood was chief from 1830 to 1831, right around the time of removal. He's the one that stayed in Mississippi and remained there. Thomas, his cousin, was chief on 2 occasions, from 1834 to 38, and again from 1842 to 1850. According to stories, which I'm still working on these stories, he's the one that the house at Swink was built for. That's why there's a picture of the house of Swink. And I couldn't find any actual photos of him. So I put the Swink house in there. This is a painting of Greenwood Lafleur. And then Basil Lafleur, who was Greenwood's younger brother, served as chief or general governor of the nation from 1859 to 1860. So, and of course, Lafleur County, where Poteau is named after this family. So there is one family. Now we're going to get to Nathaniel Folsom. Oh boy. He was an English trader. He married into the Choctaw Nation. He came here and opened a trading post called Pigeon Roost. That's the location of Pigeon Roost down in Mississippi, and it kind of interested me that there's a Pigeon Roost out there by Boswell, a Pigeon Roost church and cemetery. So I guess the name carried over when they came over here. He also married 2 Choctaw women who were sisters. And their names are, I have their names, but their names are some fancy ones. They were nieces of Pushmataha. So he wasn't directly related, or they weren't directly related to Shumaka, but they married into the family that Shumaka had been adopted into. So it's kind of a weaker link there. And the sisters were both nieces of Pushmataha and granddaughters of Homastubby, who was the father of Moshe Latubby, who went with Pushmataha and Apukshinabi to Washington in 1824, as we talked about last month. Okay. At least 7 members of this family would later become chiefs of the Choctaw Nation. All right. These are the Folsom chiefs, and there possibly could be more. There was another one I suspected, but I couldn't prove it, so I didn't put him on here. David Folsom was chief at just around the time of removal. That's him at the top right. His brother, Isaac Folsom, would serve as chief from 1841 to 1846. 2 of their cousins, Nathaniel Folsom and Peter Folsom, would serve as chief from 1842 to 46 and 1846 to 1850. Notice, from 1842 through 1846, you had 2 Folsoms were serving as chiefs of 2 of the 3 parts of the Choctaw Nation. So they basically controlled a majority of the leadership of the Choctaw Nation at that time. And then when Peter was done, that's Peter at the bottom right, he was a preacher. David's son, George, became the next leader, and he served as chief for 4 years. And then it gets deep here. Peter Pitchlin was the grandson of Nathaniel Folsom's brother, and he served as chief from 1864 to 1866. And then Samuel Garland was a cousin to Peter, and he was also, he was Peter Pitchlin's cousin. So his mom and Peter Pitchlin's dad were brother and sister. He served as chief just before Peter did. I kind of got him backwards on there. The Garlands were the ones I was really having, because there was a Sam Garland that briefly served as chief around the time of removal. But I can't find, and if the name's the same, you'd think there'd be a link, but I can't track it down yet. So I'm still working on that. But there you have 7 different Folsoms that were chief of the Choctaw Nation, and sometimes there'd be 2 of them at the same time over 2 of the 3 branches. Okay, now we get to the McCurtain family. And the McCurtains, by the way, the McCurtains and the LaFleurs are first cousins. So they start out as cousins, and as the line goes down, they're still second cousins, so they're related also. Daniel McCurtain was an Irish trader. He came to the Choctaw lands in the late 1700s and married Hannah Cole, who was yet another child of Shumaka in 1800. Their son Cornelius became a chief of the tribe, and 3 of Shumaka, of Daniel McCurtain and Hannah's grandchildren would also become Choctaw chiefs. They were all children of Cornelius. 3 of Cornelius' sons would serve as chief of the Choctaw Nation. That's a restored house that Green McCurtain lived in up in the Podo, Heavener area. I was trying to find a better picture where there wasn't a fence, but I couldn't find one. I'm sure there are better pictures out there. In fact, there's one in my textbook, but I don't know how to take pictures from a textbook and then transfer it to here. Technology. All right, this is Cornelius McCurtain. He lived from 1803 to 1871. He served as chief from 1850 to 1854. Notice that is during the time that one of the Folsoms was serving. So they have an overlap. This was Jackson McCurtain, the first of his children to serve as chief. He lived from 1830 to 1885. He served a term as chief from 1880 to 1884. Edmund McCurtain took over right after his brother. He lived from 1842 to 1890 and was chief for 2 years from 1884 to 1886. And then Green McCurtain, who lived from 1848 to 1910. He was elected chief in 1896 and served to 1900. Then he was elected again in 1902 and was serving as chief of the Choctaws at the time Oklahoma became a state, and stayed in that position up until the time of his death. Okay, I ran across a weird story. You know I love weird stories. Okay, Tandy Walker was the Choctaw governor, which was the equivalent of chief from 1858 to 1859. After the Civil War, the Walkers and the McCurtains lived close to one another at Scullyville. Their families did not like each other. Robert McCurtain, which was the youngest child of Cornelius McCurtain, the youngest son, took a fancy to Tandy Walker's daughter. And one day he went up to the house to try and meet up with her. As he got off the horse, her brother came outside and shot him. Robert rode about 100 yards down the road and then fell off the horse and died. The brother, whose name was Henderson Walker, went into hiding, but would eventually come home 2 years later. After he came home, he was killed by Jackson and Green McCurtain in revenge for the death of their younger brother. And both Jackson and Green would go on to be chiefs later on. But all of this happened in 1874. So it was after Cornelius McCurtain had been chief, but before the 3 sons had been chief. Now, I said that there was a fourth kid, that Shumaka had a fourth kid. I found several records that a fourth kid existed. His name was Oscar Cole, but he is very, very hard to find stuff about. Two sources that I looked at said he married a woman named Vida Okadastada Rainwater. It's very possible that she was a member of the Wolf clan of the Cherokee Nation. So he would have married outside of the Choctaws, but I haven't found any record of their lives or children yet. But the hunt continues. All right, any questions? Did I go too fast? It makes you kind of dizzy, doesn't it? David Folsom also married two sisters, but not at the same time. He married one of them, and then after she died, he married her younger sister. So there was a lot of marrying of sisters during that period of time. Right. No questions? All right.
Who is the journalist? Who is the journalist keeping track of the
Like I said, I used a lot of sources. One of the sources I used was a book on the Folsom family history. I found an article on the Folsom family from the 1939 issue in the Chronicles of Oklahoma, written by a man named Peter Hudson. There are very, very likely other people that are linked because, well, for example, and I put this in the notes, but I didn't put it on the slide. One of the when Michael, Louis LaFleur's brother Michael, married Ashuka, her father was Chief Red Turkey Feather. So he married the daughter of a regional chief. So, and that was a regional chief of the Oclafalaya people. So, and the LaFleurs tended to stay along with the Apuchinabi group. Okay. Any other? All right, well, I guess that wraps it up for tonight. Thank y'all.